Hi, everyone. Um, as you may have heard when the lecture, I don't have much of a voice today, so I'm going to record this one so you can have it. This is the Human Growth Lecture. So let me share my screen. Okay. Stuff out of the way. Okay. So some of the basics. The nice thing about this lecture is most people are really familiar with this stuff because you're talking about your own life. So first we have the sperm and the egg. We know meet to make a human. XX is female, XY is male. And as we mature, we hit puberty and we are able to then pass on genetic code. Once we have established the egg and the sperm meeting, we have conception. And in the human, we have 9 months and 3 trimesters. When we talk about that beginning of the sperm and the egg, that is known as a zygote. And that's for the first 2 weeks. From 2 weeks to 8 weeks after conception, it's known as an embryo. And from 8 weeks until birth, it's known as a fetus. Anytime during this process, there are different substances called teratogens. Teratogens can cause harm to the developing zygote, embryo, or fetus. An example, chicken pox, if mom is exposed while she's pregnant, rubella, HIV, and I could also include the Zika virus in there also, can cause damage to the development of the zygote, embryo, or fetus. Anywhere in that exposure period, there are critical periods of time which you're not responsible to know for intro to psychology. If you go on to take human growth and development or anatomy and physiology, you would be required to know those time periods. Alcohol and drug use, you may have heard of fetal alcohol syndrome. If mom was drinking during her pregnancy, of course, heroin, cocaine. Remember, the developing zygote, embryo, fetus is sharing everything with mom. So anything that mom consumes is going to possibly affect the developing fetus. Caffeine, smoking, both are stimulants. They're legal stimulants, but they also can still affect the development of the zygote, embryo, or fetus. Diet and pollution. Some things we can control, like our diet, but we can't necessarily control pollution. So for years, we dumped things into our rivers, and we've put things into our, our environment. People who are living in areas that they can't get enough nutritious food for the development of the fetus, so problems can occur. Or if we have contaminated different parts of our environment, like mercury was dumped into our rivers, even just a little bit of mercury can do some brain damage for the development of the fetus. And then sometimes we just have what we call maternal stressors. Things that can affect the mom, that can cause stress on the baby. A single mom, maybe pregnancy that has some difficulty where mom would have to have complete bed rest. All of these could be maternal stressors. When we're born with some remarkable reflexes. And a reflex is something you didn't have to learn. It's through the autonomic nervous system. So the first one is like the withdrawal reflex. So If the child is in any way overstimulated, the child may pull back or turn away. They tend to look at their hands to kind of self-soothe themselves. The stepping reflex we see up until about 2 months. Nobody's baby is walking at 2 months. They just don't have the muscle control to do that. What parents may be seeing is called the stepping reflex. The sucking reflex, again, babies don't have to learn how to suckle on mom's breast. That's something that comes natural. They may have to learn to latch onto mom's nipple. So a lot of times they'll put like sugar water on mom's nipple, and babies love sweet. So that will help the baby to latch so they can nurse. The rooting reflex is very simple. If you touch one side of a baby, they will turn in that direction. And again, we believe this is to help in nursing. The palmar grasp, yeah, that's exactly what it is. They grab with their palms instead of with their, what we call the pincher grasp. That doesn't develop later until they have more muscle control. The startle reflex is kind of interesting because if the baby feels like they are falling, you will see this motion where the baby's arms will come out and they tuck their head and their arms almost to protect all the vital organs. The swimming reflex. And again, your baby is not swimming at 6 months. If you put them in water, they'll move their arms and their legs, but that doesn't mean they're swimming. You let go, they sink. They consume lots of water, they can drown. So please don't think just because your baby's arms and legs are moving in water that they have complete muscle control enough that they can help themselves to float at ease. The Babinski reflex, if you rub your fingers down the bottom of the foot of a baby, it will curl its toes. And it's actually one of the reflexes they look for if a paramedic or EMT would be called to a home where the baby may be having difficulties. And this way they can check that there's no paralysis by seeing this Babinski reflex. And then the eye reflex, the eye blink, that's one that's around for life. And you know this yourself. If something comes towards your face, you automatically blink. It's part of that autonomic nervous system. That's the only one of these reflexes that you never lose. It's with you for life. And when we talk about nature versus nurture, there are some things that are just kind of pre-programmed in the course of the human life experience, and that's temperament. And in the field of psychology, we say, what makes you you is part temperament and part your personality. So temperament would be, are you easygoing? Are you outgoing? Are you shy, etc.? And this is not something that was necessarily developed. It just happened. This is who you are. So some children are much more approachable. They're very outgoing. They'll go to anyone. Other people have children that are very, very shy, are very wary of other individuals, especially strangers. But we can take that other side of the nature-nurture coin, or nature, again, being genetics, and nurture being your environment. We can help develop some of these skills. But just because a child is shy, that isn't a bad thing. It isn't something that a parent did wrong. That's part of who they are. So there are certain things that happen in infancy and childhood, like a child will crawl before they walk. They will scoot sometimes before they will walk. There are certain milestones. We develop top, down, in, out when it comes to muscle control. So we are able to control all these major muscles uh, long before we're able to control our fingers and our toes. And perception out of all of our senses that we're born with is the worst. It actually doesn't develop until a visual sense of like an adult until about 6 months. So, when you see that baby smile at you after, they've just had this difficult traveling down the birth canal, they actually don't see you. It's probably gas or a little twitch or a pain, and they make a smile. But they don't really see the way we see. It's more fuzzy, it's out of focus, and they see like an image, a big image, but their sense of smell is remarkable. Babies can actually pick out in a room full of all women who are lactating, they can pick out their mom's breast just from the smell of the milk. When we talk about some of the experiments that have been done on children, one of them is known as the visual cliff experiment. And that's when we have kind of a table. And if you call a toddler that started to crawl towards you, prior to developing depth perception, they literally would crawl right off the table to try to get to you. Whereas once that child develops depth perception, they will stop at the edge of the table. And we see that development anywhere, it can be anywhere between 6 months to a year. And we also know that children can develop habits, things that are no longer stimulating them in the same way as they did the first time. So if I held up this bottle, this could get a baby's attention, but they would only pay attention to it for about 15 to 20 seconds, and then they would turn away. They would lose interest. Whereas all I would have to do to get their attention back is to have some other type of stimulus for them to look at. You can entertain a baby with just 2 different objects for a long time, as long as you switch them every 15 to 20 seconds or more. And auditory. The fetus can hear in the womb. And remember, any child born today doesn't know language. Every language is completely foreign. They have to learn that. But they can hear sounds. And there's some really cool research that was done on developing fetuses where they would read to them like a nursery rhyme, a rhyming thing, it's like 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, old fish, new fish, black fish, blue fish. And after the birth, if that baby was colicky or cranky or crying or couldn't settle down, they found if you read that same nursery rhyme, it would calm them down, like reminding them of how calm they were in the womb. The same thing is done with music. You can play different types of music. It doesn't matter if you do rap or rock and roll. They'll remember the beat, the sound of the beat. They won't remember the words, but they remember that sound, and it can calm them down. There's some very noted psychologists, Noam Chomsky from Harvard University is one of the most experts in the field of child language development. And he talks about child-directed speech. Another term for it is parentese. And when we talk about parentese, we're talking about things like something you would say to a child or a way you would say it to a child, but not necessarily an adult. So when we talk to children, we tend to talk quicker and we tend to use shorter sentences. And many times we use words that we wouldn't say to your boss, "Ooh, I gotta go poo poo." No, but you would say that to a little toddler. So child-directed speech, specific to the child, and they understand it fairly quickly. There was a movement back in the 90s to get parents to use more formal language. So instead of saying like pee pee and poo poo, they wanted you to use, do you have to go urinate? Do you have to go defecate? And the research showed that actually it made no difference if you used the child directed speech or if you used the formal terms. Actually, the formal terms were a little more uncomfortable for parents to use. Children also have to learn everything about language, from the very basics, from overextension to underextension of words. So, why is one goose a goose, but more than one are geese? That type of development is something that is not, you're not born with it. It's a learned response. Same with grammar. Kids don't know how to diagram sentences. When they're two, they use uh, smaller bits of information to get across their message. And those smaller bits we call telegraphic speech, short, little sentences. I'm sure you've heard this one. Got milk? Yeah, we all have heard that one. But boy, doesn't that say everything? If a child says to you, got milk? Well, they want a glass of milk. They didn't have to go, hey, mom, I'd like a glass of milk right now, please. Right? Small, short words, ways that they can communicate the information. And language development does have a critical period of time. Children must hear that language in order to be able to process that language. Most noted child psychologists that you may have heard of would be Jean Piaget, who was a Swiss psychologist. And he's what we call a stage theorist. He says that every child goes through 4 distinct stages. They don't skip a stage, and there's certain characteristics of things that occur during that stage. So we're going to go through each of those stages. The sensory motor stage is from birth to 2. And then pre-operation was like 2 to 7. And then concrete operations is 7 to 11. And then formal operations is 11 on. So basically, we're all in formal operations. But before we start more into depth on those things, we need to talk about how Piaget says that we remember things. And he says the way we store information in our long-term memory is by using schemas. A schema is just a chunk of information that we've used. And to build that information, we either add to it, which is called assimilation, or we make a change to it because we run across something different, and we call that an accommodation. So, an example. If you've ever gone in the bathroom and say CCAC and the lights weren't on, where would you go to look for a light switch? Well, from your experience, I'm sure most of you would start looking on the wall. Typically, it's on the right-hand side, but it could be on the left. So let's say you're checking out the right-hand side and it's not right there. So you may move up, down, you might even try the other side, and there's the light switch and you turn on the light switch. We would call that assimilating information into what we already know. We're learning that bathroom, the light switch is just a little higher, but it is on the wall. what we already had in long-term memory. Accommodation is when you have to make a change to what's already in your mind. So if you've ever been to South Campus in the G building ground floor, there's a bathroom there. When you walk in, there is no light switch on the wall. And people many times will just walk out and go find another bathroom. But in that particular bathroom, and it's the only one I know of on South Campus or even in Allegheny Campus, that when you walk into the bathroom, you have to walk 6 feet into the bathroom, and a sensor picks up that you're there. And therefore, it turns on the lights for you, and those lights will stay on for 11 and a half minutes and then shut off. That would be an accommodation. I mean, you wouldn't come back to your previous campus and just walk in 6 feet and hope the lights are going to come on. No, you're going to check to see that there's a light switch on the wall first, right? But once you've experienced that bathroom over at South Campus, you make an accommodation. You make a change to what you have already in long-term memory. And that's what we mean by changing that schema for how we turn on lights in a bathroom. So let's go through the 4 periods, the 4 stages. As I said, 0 to 2 for sensory motor. The major achievements that occur through this is what we call object permanence. Between the ages of birth and 2, it's very easy to play, hide the object with little toddlers. If you just cover it up, they think it's gone. They're like, oh, they're like so surprised. And then you pull off the cover and it's back, because they really thought it was gone because it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. But once they've achieved object permanence, you could cover an object, but they know it's still there. And that's how you can tell they're beginning to move into the next stage. Also, this is the stage where infants tend to imitate others. And it could be initially just imitation. So, like if you wave at the child, they wave back at you. Or it could be you making a face, and maybe 3 hours later, that child makes that same face. So they can actually have a delay in their imitation. Pre-operational stage, again, 2 to 7, major achievements, capacity for mental representation. In other words, have you ever seen a heart for I love you, you love New York? That would be an example of a child, when they hand you a heart, their way of expressing love. They can't come up with some formal definition of, oh, how much they love you. We have adults that can't do that. But that heart represents that they love you. We also see at this stage what we call egocentrism. And an example of that would be children see everything from their point of view, and they think you see it also. So let's say when you come home from work, your child wants to play hide and seek, and they're in this stage, this 2 to 7 stage. So let's say they hide behind the curtains, except when you're looking at the curtains as the adult, you can see their feet. But see, they don't see their feet. They see the curtain in front of them, so they don't think you can see them because of egocentrism. Everything is from their point of view. So if a child says, do you see that, mommy or daddy? You need to kind of get in that exact position so you can see exactly what they're seeing. Concrete operations. Concrete operations are between the ages of 7 and 11. And the major achievements that we see going on here would be taking another person's perspective. So now It's not egocentrism. They can classify objects. They can put all the squares over here and all the triangles over here and all the circles over here, where before they may have had difficulty with that. And the major thing that we see is what we call conservation of matter. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. So an example, if we had a big ball of clay and another big ball of clay, and you ask the child, are they the exact same thing? And they'll go, yes. And you flatten one completely flat and ask the child, are they the same or is one of them bigger? And they'll point to the flat one because it's so much larger, and they'll go, it's bigger. And you roll it back up. Are they the same? Uh-huh. But that one has more because it's bigger when it's spread out. So when they are able to tell you, well, no, they're the same amount of clay in both, you just flatten one, then we know they've moved to the next stage. And then formal operations is from 11 and above, according to Piaget. And some of the major achievements of this stage, very much abstract concepts. They can think logically using inductive and deductive reasoning, and they can reverse things. Prior to this stage, if you had a basket and you put a banana, then an apple, then an orange, and some grapes, then another banana, and you asked the child to take them out in the opposite order that you put them in, children would have difficulty. But once they've mastered reversibility, they can do that with no problem. And as I said, they can do inductive and deductive reasoning here. You are all in formal operations. You would not be able to take this class, this 4-hour Zoom class online, if you were not able to think in an analytic way. Now, some of the other psychologists that have come along disagree with Piaget in the ages that he has placed on these stages, because they have done research and found that even there are a few 3-month-olds that have developed object permanence. So a lot of psychologists believe that Piaget underestimated children's abilities. And then came Lee Vygotsky. Lee Vygotsky's theory is not a stage theory like Piaget. His is one of social interaction, how well that we interact with people and that we learn from our environment. So we learn from our culture, we learn from our family, we learn from our friends and all that interaction. And why that's important, because so many of our young people now are so much in front of a screen, just like we are right now. And it's not the same type of interaction as actually playing together. And Vygotsky did a whole set of research on different styles of play and why play is important. The sad thing is, one of the things that we're seeing pulled out of many schools is recess and giving children a time to play. Oh, let's, throw this in and let's throw this in and let's have them do that. But there is some benefit to interacting with each other. And then we have attachment style. And Harry Harlow did the research on attachment style. And Harry Harlow is your extra credit for test number 3. You can use the internet to look it up, a good paragraph or 2 explaining to me Harry Harlow's research. I'm going to give you just a little smidget of it now. So Harry Harlow took uh, infant rhesus monkeys away from their moms and put them in a room with surrogate moms that were made out of chicken wire, and one was chicken wire and terry cloth, and one was chicken wire with a milk bottle attached. And he wanted to see which surrogate mother would that baby monkey go to. And even though the baby monkey may go over to the chicken wire surrogate mother to get a drink or two of milk, it never stayed there. It always came back to the mother that was wrapped in terry cloth, that comfort of contact and warmth. Some children don't have that in their life. They don't have that contact. And as Harlow's research continued, he learned that there's some positive here. Even if somewhere along the line, the child is able to bond with someone else, even if it's not their parents, they can turn out to be fairly normal adolescents and young adults. They can develop separation anxiety, and the woman who did the research on that was Mary Answorth. She did the stranger situations, and what she did was have children in a room, and it started with just mom, but then they repeated it with grandparents and dad, etc., and a stranger, and mom would leave. And if a child would go to the door to try to go after mom, maybe cry a little, maybe settle down in a few minutes. But when mom came back, embraced mom, couldn't wait for mom to get back, we call that a secure attachment. 80% of all people have a secure attachment in their life, but still not all. Some people have what we call an avoidant attachment. And if you know anyone who's maybe been engaged for 8 years and doesn't look like they're ever going to get married, maybe one of them has what we call an avoidant attachment. That means they're afraid the other person is going to leave them. So they don't want to put like all their eggs in one basket. They're worried that they'll get hurt. So it's better not to, take another step, because they could, feel the pain of that person leaving. So secure attachment, 80% of the population has that. Avoidant attachment, we're talking about 10% of the population has that. Resistant attachment is similar to avoidant, but eventually the child would greet the mother at the door, not right away, but maybe a minute or two later. But it's a slow to kind of warm up to mom. Oh, you left me. Okay, I'll forgive you. And that's about 5%. And then we have about 5% of people that don't show any type of consistent pattern, whether it's secure, avoidant, resistant. Remember, children have to learn everything. They have to learn who they are and their identity, and they have to learn what it means to be male or female for themselves. They have to learn what are their roles in the world. And as much as you may try not to enforce like any type of stereotypic role for male or female, it's already out there in the culture. And by the age of 3, children know what's acceptable or not acceptable in their social group for being a male or a female. I'll never forget, there was this one commercial that always came around the holidays, and it had three children in it. It had two boys and one girl. And the two boys were actively playing with this train set, and the girl was in the background just watching. And you could tell that she wanted to play, but she was just standing in the background. And I kept thinking, wow, that's just blatant gender roles there, because boys play with trains, girls don't. But that's a cultural thing. Nobody ever comes out and says that to the child, but the child learns it through their experience in the environment. So, when you hear stories of men breaking some sex roles, or women breaking some sex roles, I mean, we need nurses. We need lots of nurses. We need men and women. But many times uh, in the past, men were frowned upon if they went into nursing instead of going in to be a doctor. And women were frowned upon. "Hey, why are you going to be a doctor? You could just be a nurse." So there are some things that are very much still ingrained in our culture that we're slowly breaking down, but they're still there. And even though you may not teach those stereotypes, the children learn them anyway. The man who was in charge of moral development and the research was Lawrence Kohlberg, and he made 9 dilemmas, which you can actually find online. These 9 dilemmas, the most famous was the Heinz dilemma, which I'll give to you in a minute. But he used these dilemmas to ask young boys, he only tested boys, ages 10 to 16, to reason what was right or wrong. So he wanted to see how kids, in this case, young boys, morally reason. And as I said, the most famous one is the Heinz dilemma. So this is the Heinz dilemma. So Heinz's wife is dying of cancer, and this pharmacist has made this wonderful discovery that he's worked on for 20 years. And this pharmacist is selling this product for $4,000. And it's the only chance Heinz's wife may have, except Heinz doesn't have $4,000 to buy this drug. And he's tried to borrow money, and he's tried talking with the pharmacist, "Please, please, I'll do anything. I'll work for you. I'll pay it in payments, whatever you need." And the pharmacist is like, "No, I worked for 20 years on this. I had to scrimp and save. My family's never been on vacation. We drive an old car. Now this is our chance to get our money back and live the life we deserve." So the question the boys were asked: should Heinz steal the drug to give to his wife, or should he not? So think of what your answer would be, yes or no. Now, here's the key part. It doesn't matter if you said yes or no. The next part of the question to the young men was, why? And what he did was categorize their reasons why into 3 main levels. Each had 2 subsets, but you just need to know the 3 main levels: pre-conventional, conventional, or post-conventional. Pre-conventional is if Heinz steals it, then he's not a good person if he does that. You just shouldn't do that. That would be bad. But if he lets his wife die, that would be bad too. So it didn't matter if you said yes or no. It's just the way, almost like a child thinks and reasons. The conventional way is an average way how most people think. Well, stealing's against the law. You could get arrested and go to jail. Or if you don't steal it, then you're thought to be a bad husband. You would let your wife die. So again, kind of the conventional way that many people would reason. And then there's the post-conventional. This is looking at the whole picture. So, yes, Heinz should steal the drug because money is not as important as a human life. Or, no, he shouldn't steal because you just can't go around doing everything you want to do. We would have chaos in society if you did that. So, he shouldn't steal the drug. He should work to change the law so no one ever has to make that decision again, whether to steal or not to steal to save somebody's life. So here's the example I said, so you have it for yourself. And again, they were asked to reason what is right from wrong. The problem is he only asked boys, but he applied his theory to girls also, but he never tested a boy. So here are some examples, some responses. So you have some examples to go by that will hopefully make it clearer than what I said. You can also read about all of these dilemmas online if you're interested in it. But what you have here is really enough to know for the class. The person who kind of went against Kohlberg her name was Carol Gilligan, like Gilligan's Island. She was one of his research assistants, and she said, you can't apply this to girls. You didn't test any girls. You have no data on girls, but you're applying it. And he wasn't going to change what he was doing. So she left and she did her own research. And she found that women morally reason differently than men. Men reason more logical pattern. Women are more relational. They look at the emotions and the people involved and who's interconnected before they make a decision. Her research was kind of the building block. I'm sure you've heard of the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's that type of thing, that both sexes reason morally, both sexes look at issues that are the same, but we may reason about them or think differently about them. That doesn't make one better than the other, just different. Adolescence, physical development, we have puberty. We've all gone through it, so I don't think I have to go through a lot there, but many hormonal changes are going on in your body. Some young women will start puberty as young as 8. Typically, it's around 11, 12, 13 for women. Boys typically have their first spermarchy, that's their first wet dream, typically between 12 and 14, leaning toward the 13, 14 side. But we are seeing what we call a secular trend. Over the past 100 years, it's getting a little bit younger. So when my mom was born in 1920, puberty in her generation for girls was about 14. Whereas now, again, it's between like 11, 12. So there is a little bit of a secular trend that it's coming earlier, and better health, better nutrition, better diets. We're actually eating more, even though we may eat junk food and things like that. In the 1920s, people were lucky they were getting table scraps, through the Depression. So it's not an unusual thing that we're seeing. When we talk about cognitive development, we're talking about abstract thinking. So we're talking about formal operations has occurred once we get into adolescence. And Guess what's back? Egocentrism, but it's different here. And this is really, really, really important. Please remember this. There are three main parts to adolescent egocentrism. The first one is imaginary audience. Adolescents think everyone's watching them at every time. And, maybe they are with cameras everywhere and cell phones, but, we have kids that, oh, I can't go to school. I have a zit on my nose. People will see it, or I can't wear those shoes you bought me from Walmart. What are people going to think when they see me wearing those shoes? They think that everyone is watching everything about them. That's imaginary audience. I'm going to skip the second one and go to the third one, peer pressure. And I think we all understand that one too, because we've all been through it. Peer pressure to do things, to join things, to not do something can be very powerful. And we see a little bit of pulling away from parents at this time in the family. That's also very common because kids are becoming young adults. And that's what we do to become a young adult. We have to figure out who we are and get our head in the right place. So that's very common. The second one, personal fable, is the dangerous one. Personal fable means they will participate in more risky behavior because they don't think they can die because they're young. That's kind of scary. They'll go to a party and somebody will have pills there that they stole from their grandma or their grandpa's cupboard and hand them some Jack Daniels and go, here, have a few of these. Okay. Because they don't think anything can happen to them. I'll never forget the time that a friend of mine was a counselor, I think it was up at Seneca Valley, and one of the students was driving 90 miles an hour on a road and hit a nice patch and went down the embankment. And she asked me to come up for the funeral and, the viewing of the body because she thought they may need some help. People, will be upset, especially kids. And I can remember the line of kids wrapped around the entire block to try to get into the funeral home. And as we're standing there in line, we heard a young man, a couple people behind us saying, well, he was just foolish. He didn't know how to drive. I'll show you tonight. We'll drive that road at 90 miles an hour and you can see I'm a good driver. Their good friend just died doing that. But he's saying, oh no, I can do it because, it's not going to happen to me. Just like kids will say, hey, I'm not going to get pregnant the first time we have sex. Yeah, people get pregnant the first time you have sex sometimes. It's personal fable. The interesting thing and scary thing about this, some people never grow out of this. Some people take this into adulthood and don't think it can happen to them and continue to participate in risky behavior. It's normal for kids to have conflicts with their parents and have mood swings. Depression is very normal at this age. There's a difference between being alone and lonely. Being alone is not an issue. Kids like to be alone at that age. They want to go to their room. They want to be with their friends. They don't want their parents dropping them off right at the mall at the front. That's one thing. Loneliness can lead to issues. Loneliness is a feeling, an emotion, or being alone is a choice that people make. They participate in more risk-taking behavior. Peer relationships are very, very, very important to children at this age. And I have good news and bad news about teenage pregnancy. The good news, teenage pregnancy has gone down in the last 10 years, right? The bad news, younger girls are getting pregnant. Whereas before we were seeing 17, 18-year-olds. Now we're seeing 13, 14, and 15-year-olds getting pregnant. Not as many people getting pregnant, but much younger. I don't know about you. At 13, I was more interested in watching cute guys and playing, games with my friends, not, having a kid and having to raise a child. And then in adulthood, our body changes. Uh, for some of you, you're still very young. You haven't noticed that as much. But people my age, once you get to be 62, start to see some wrinkles. All those times I laid out in the sun when I was young with no sunscreen because we didn't think you had to use sunscreen. And now people who have skin damage and have developed skin cancer, or, their skin is just really tough and almost like leather. There's nothing we can do about it. You can buy all the creams in the world, but the damage you did 50 years before that doesn't necessarily just go away with some miracle cream. So there are some things that are genetic. There are people that are 85 that look like they're 40. And then there are people that are 40 that look like they're 85. Our environment, was there a lot of pollution? Were we exposed based on where we work? So the people that, worked in the steel mills, etc. And then women in menopause, it's a time period now that your body is slowing down. You're not going to be able to conceive children anymore. And it's an interesting time. I teach the human sexuality class too. And one of the interesting things I talk about is that it's a very freeing time for women when it comes to sex because they don't have to worry about getting pregnant. So we see an increase many times of women after menopause wanting to have sex. Maybe you've heard of cougars and their cubs, women in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s that are looking for younger men because now they don't have to worry that they're going to get pregnant. They can now enjoy sex without any type of ramification. Other things we see, there are different stages, different psychologists, and one of them is Erik Erikson. He says that there are 8 stages of development. We're only focusing on 3 in Intro to Psychology, and that would be intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus self-absorption, and integrity versus despair. Intimacy versus isolation would occur around 21, 22 to about 32, 33, roughly. You won't have to know the years, but and that's when you decide if you're going to kind of share yourself or your life with another person. Not necessarily sex, because remember in psychology, intimacy is relationship, not sex. Sex would be passion. Versus being by yourself, kind of being closed in, not wanting to be with anyone. Generativity versus self-absorption. These are the parenting years, again, around 33 till about 50-ish, where not only are you taking care of yourself, but you're taking care of your family. You may be taking care of older parents who are now getting up in age that may need a little help. This is the time period where people do a lot of volunteer work. They're running their kids to soccer games and baseball games and dance lessons and very generative giving of themselves versus people who, nope, all about me, just about me. So, when you hear of people who That's all they care about is themselves. That would be that category. And then integrity versus despair. The way we look at our life when we get to be in our 50s and our 60s and 70s, looking back on our life, are we happy with what we did? Are we happy with we are? That would be integrity. Despair, we look back on our life, there are things we can't change. We're not happy with our decisions now. And we're in despair. We lead a sad, lonely, sometimes miserable, mature life. Your personality is stable all the way through adulthood. So basically, your personality that you have at the age of 25, unless something major comes along, is the personality you're going to have the rest of your life. And we also develop much more mature emotions. We are much more cognizant of how to control our emotions. And that is it. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me or text me. And we're going to stop there. Have an awesome day.